It is June the 21st, 2025. I'm Chris, and this is the future of photography.
The future of photography.
Hey, Jeremiah. Good morning.
Easy to lose track of time.
Yeah, that's what happens.
Welcome back to both of us, face to face here.
Thanks for your time and for being here. I'm usually the one who's missing all the time. So today it's Adrian. So okay, what we're going to talk about today. Let me start this.
Roll it up.
Do you remember the 1990s and the glossy ads in magazines? Let's say car ads. And let's just keep it with car ads for now.
Car and tabletop probably are well worth talking about both. But car ads are a good place to begin because they have evolved so significantly over the last decades.
So the question that I want to ask right from the beginning to the listeners is, when did you see the last photo in a car ad where you know for sure it was a photo? That's what I want to lead with, and now you take it on.
Great question. I'm pretty convinced that no one could seriously answer that with any accuracy nowadays.
I couldn't.
Given that I began more or less as a commercial photographer,
right?
I began as an artist, and my work was discovered in a gallery by someone at a big agency, and had hired me to do some in that way. It was a tabletop ad with portraits, and so it was basically in the style of the art that I was doing, large format. And of course, when I asked how much they paid, it was, "Oh yeah, you're paying me for a day's work that I made the entire year last year? Oh yeah, I'll do it. I'll sell out in a second." Anyway,
advertising photography used to be really well paid, depending on the kind of thing you were hired for.
It was super well paid. I had a funky studio, which led the agency to kind of, "Oh, this is so cool. We're kind of slumming it with an artist who's doing great work for us." Anyway, I made hay of it, and but that got me. One thing led to another, and I began a pretty intense trajectory as a commercial photographer. With a studio, multiple assistants, a lot of lighting rigs, big cameras, relationship with the lab, couriers moving in and out. In other words, a ongoing business that was robust, intense, a lot of meetings in person, presume, of course, and then evolving into international work. And the way it used to be is the clients used to, with their agency itself, have a kind of a conceptual meeting about the work. Let's just talk cars. So it'd be a new car. What would that look like? What would it feel like? How are we going to sell it? What's the market, right?
So then what years are we talking about? Is that in the 70s? Is that?
It was the 80s for me.
The 80s, okay. So 80s, kind of, I guess, the last decade where that was still a big thing. After that, we started to. Okay. Let's continue. Let's continue first.
Yeah, because in the 70s, I was doing commercial photography, but I quickly was pulled into fashion photography for lots of reasons, which could be the subject of another podcast for us. But and you weren't making much money, but there was a lot of prestige. I was working around the world, and then came back to New York to do more serious product photography, etc. So that was kind of the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. And when the agency presented to the production houses for bidding, they would come up with the quote ideas, storyboards, etc. Sometimes, if you worked with them, they would involve you very early in the creative, as they called it. In other words, the design of it, because they may have said, oh, car moves around a beautiful landscape, and you'd go, oh, the Oregon coast, or, Monument Valley, or, what I mean, Namibia, wherever you kind of conceptualize their idiosyncratic storyboards. And then,
and at that point, no one was talking budget, because taking a car and shipping it to Namibia or somewhere around the globe was part of the whole thing.
The budgets were in the millions. Yeah. Often, because when you did car commercials, you usually worked with at least one or two 40-foot trailers with basically an entire garage and mechanics, all from the actual factory, because they would tweak and polish the car to be as exacting as it was. And they would also create the windshields to be a little darker so that it would not reveal the driver, sometimes lighter to reveal the driver. So every piece of it was carefully considered, and there were multiple cars, because what if one got dinged? What if there was a problem, a scratch? Because some of these
they were not just shipping a 2-ton car around the world; they were shipping 10 tons around the world.
Think F1 in a miniaturized way, but it was an infrastructure that they would do. And they would kind of, set up their garage and polish the cars. And then we had the production aspect of it, which would be, the rigs. Now, of course, when I later did cinema commercials, that even became bigger and bigger and bigger. But let's just go back to shooting simply, which is a car in a studio. Studios would have to be big. You'd have to have a huge soft light. There would be you'd take days, I'm not kidding, days to light it. Of course, then you'd have a bevy of retouchers afterwards to remove any of the reflections of the cameras.
I remember being in a studio to hold a session for a client, like in front of people, and that studio was a former car photography studio, and they had the big cyclorama pretty much built into the building. It was made from concrete, painted white, and then they had several soft boxes hoisted up to the ceiling that were the size of 3 cars, with probably 10 lights in each, like massive thing, lots of rigging, lots of stuff.
Adjustable,
everything adjustable, with a electrically adjustable, with chains winching things up and down and so on. That was I just saw it. I didn't see it in action. It was just a kind of remnants of a bit of a past. That was in that was 2007, 8 maybe. So
that's quite late for even.
That was late. That was probably after the time when car photos were actually photographed.
Yeah, we use large format because of the retouching, and the detailing in the cars is very important. Yeah. Often there was a turntable for the car, so that you were able to adjust it without driving in and out and all of the machinations of complexity inside a building. Even though the car would be on rollers, and they would, so it was a big operation. It cost the production company, or it earned the production company, many hundreds of thousands, or close to $700,000 or $800,000 for a shoot, maybe to deliver a single image. The agency would then take that money and mark it up 35%, bill the clients, and then the agency would, of course, elect to decide where to place those ads, like how to do it, magazines, billboards, etc.
So that's, just the logistics of that whole endeavor. Let's say shooting a car on location, you need to transport that thing. You have a whole bunch of staff. You have you have complications, as in like you depend on the weather. If it's outside, you have to do all sorts of things, I guess, for secrecy when there's a product launch coming up. So you can't, like, you might have to have some security personnel to make sure no one sees you. That's a huge thing, and it's a very expensive thing. In the studio, a bit cheaper probably, but
you're still
not
talking
that
about
much cheaper, right?
25 or 30 people. You're having the clients themselves come to babysit the car from Detroit, in this case, in America.
Right.
So put them up at hotels, and I mean,
of course,
you're talking
feed
about
them,
massive
wine them and dine them. Yes.
To take one image, and so when it became, again, 2007-8, you had a big, economic collapse. Budgets shrank.
Yes.
People were looking for different ways to approach cars. And
so
just as an aside, because one of the things that happened, mainly not for commercials, still photography, but for filmed commercials, the first rigs of the body of a car without any, or it was basically the interior structure of a car. Somebody had made that, where the wheelbase would be able to be expanded, widthwise, the car lengthwise, height-wise, and then you would film that, and they would, with expensive CGI, dress the top of the car. That was like the first iteration of magic.
So going back a bit, in the 80s, it was all analog, of course. It was huge, logistically expensive, a huge thing to do. And then if you go into the 1990s, that's when digital starts showing up. So the early phase 1 backs are an indicator. Photoshop 3.0 is the first version that had layers, which changed everything. Lots more fixing it in post, where you couldn't do earlier on. Probably
even more. A typical shot of a car on a road, wait for the light, nice and low, beautiful, snap it.
Yes.
The car's not moving. In Photoshop, streaking it. And
give it motion blur, rotate the wheels and blur them and stuff. Yep.
Yeah.
So and then hybrid shoots for sure, where like parts of the car are digital, as you said, the roof or other parts of it. Companies back then in the 90s, maybe a bit later than the 90s, then started moving to full CGI. Two examples that are not from the car photography are IKEA. They started in the 2000s, they started to transition to digital catalog photography, which is now pretty much fully CG. I found an article from 2014 where they said 75% of their catalog is CGI. So now that would probably be 95 or more percent. We are looking at another one. I'm not sure if you know Zalando. It's here in Europe. It's a big shoe discount company, clothing. Their catalog, even clothing, even stuff that fabrics that fall in a specific way and so on, that is mostly digital now, mostly CGI. And so that transition, tell me a few things about that transition, because were you still doing commercial photography back then when that transition started?
In the 90s, I was, well, in the 80s, I was doing a lot of commercials as well. I evolved from still photography to commercial director, and I was doing that, including a lot of car commercials. Which I love doing, because we would always go to the most beautiful parts of the country and run it, and we spend money.
Beautiful. You need beautiful locations. You need them in the best possible weather. Yeah, sure.
Helicopters, no drones, so you were chasing. I mean, it's like whatever. And car commercials used to have the massive budgets because you're talking about big companies who,
Sure.
the advertising budget was relatively small for that, for their gross margins, et cetera, and what they sold the cars for. So the interesting transitions came towards the end of the 90s. Again, CG was used mainly for post. I remember that. As we got into the 2000s, we had some, as the budget started to tighten because sales and all the rest of it. But, the financial indicators are the things that drove a lot of this, the quote innovation, if you want to call it that way. Also, car companies started to make cars that looked kind of the same. That was the other thing.
Yes.
So with that, you had to start to go into lifestyle brand ID, which was a different variant. You didn't need a large format camera. Sometimes they would go, yeah, let's muddy up the car. This was very innovative. I remember I did a Toyota Tundra, one of those truck commercials, and I wanted it covered in mud and all of that stuff. And it was the first time they had to have a big meeting at Toyota because they had never done that. It was always like, you're going through the worst conditions. The car is spotless. And even if it got muddy, they would retouch it out. But this time they were like, yeah, let's do it. And it was innovative, seeing it drive through mud and the spray and all of that stuff. As we move closer to CG, the fix it in post becomes much more of a battle cry on set, both for the clients and the agency.
But you as a photographer weren't the one who did the fixing. Those were different people, right?
Absolutely.
So your job was creative ideas and the vision and the capture of the different assets, pretty much.
Of course, the lighting would be significant.
Right.
The lighting. And there's always a relationship between the photographer and the ad agency because those are the ones that hired you. The agency, of course, were hired by the client. And as you had the conglomeratization of these big industrial elements, the separation between the photographer and the decision maker at the client, in other words, who approved the ad in the car company or any of these big companies, became further and more distant. Because I remember doing early beer commercials, and these are commercials, film commercials, where the vice president of the brewery would be on set and
Really?
you'd go like, hey, look what I'm going to do. And yeah, let's do it. You'd involve people creatively so there wouldn't be people looking over their shoulders and all of that stuff. But by the way, all of this as an aside to anybody who's interested in, how I got chased out of the advertising business. It was like at one point, I just could not handle a discussion about an extra way in the distance, whether they should be wearing a blue dress or a green dress when, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. I just wanted to do my own thing. Anyway, that's an aside.
Too many cooks. Too many cooks, right?
So as CG evolved, so did the look and feel of car commercials and many other kinds of commercials. If we're talking about tabletop, which is also a sister to this, again, I remember they would bring in home economists to actually, I did a Burger King commercial at some point. They were placing the seeds,
individual sesame seeds, yeah.
Yeah, and painting the
So food stylists were a big thing. You had like a ton of control over things. Were you also involved in any of the? I mean, one thing that happened back then was the advent of the flying food commercials, where you have high-speed cameras and stuff flying in the air and twirling around, and then landing into a perfect burger or something.
Sure. I was not there were guys who that was their thing. They had it all mapped out scientifically and what speed and, but of course I often muscled myself into using a photosonics camera with huge film racks and I just remember hearing the sound of when you call roll
This must
it,
be loud. These things must be
spinning really loud, and you didn't want to wait a second before you called action because you're
What are we talking?
through
What are we talking in terms of frames per second? Hundreds, thousand,
thousand,
thousand frame on film.
On film,
That
so
is expensive.
A lot of light necessary.
Right.
They used to hire me for these commercials. Often it would be they would get me to do like on that Budweiser commercial, we lit an entire shipyard of a ship in dry dock.
Awesome.
In San Francisco, with Alan Davio as the cinematographer,
like a real thing, not half of it being matte paintings and
the entire
miniatures.
Ship.
Wow.
We used every light in San Francisco, every light available, because it was dusk and guys on the ship with action would be they're welding and. I mean, huge for 1 or 2 or 3 seconds. And then, of course, the bar scenes where the workers would come. And then somebody would do the pours and that kind of, all of the.
That was a Budweiser commercial in the 90s or later? In the 90s, okay.
No, the 90s, yeah.
Okay.
I didn't do much, by the mid 90s I was done. But
so still big logistics. And was that all shot in camera, or was the compositing going on later on?
No, it was all in camera.
Not much.
In my experience, it was all in camera. I mean, there were people who specialized in specific sort of animation and layering and collaging. But you were hired for your style, and my style was kind of pretty neorealism.
Right, and if you look at the flying food commercials, that's a thing I believe that is still mostly being done practically, because the physics are hard to get right in you're shaking your head. Is that all digital now too?
No, I'm saying by the time this podcast comes up,
it's probably changed. Okay, let's move on into the future now, or no, into the now, because
to the now, because this is what's happening now.
We've talked early. By the way, right after photography became a thing in the 1850s, they were already doing photography for advertising, but most of the early photography, I'd say up to the 50s, was probably mostly illustrations, where you'd had a photo and then someone would kind of mangle it with paint, with colors and so on. Only then, after the 50s, we ended up with like the golden age of the craft, with big cameras and medium format and large format and Kodachrome and C41 and so on. Then the digital disruption, sometimes in the 90s, started coming in, and companies going more CGI. And now, for the last couple of years, maybe, we've had something completely new, and that is AI, of course.
AI is coming for you.
It's interesting because that.
Let me run it. This
go ahead.
For a
go
second.
ahead. Go ahead.
If you're a commercial photographer today, this is the bottom line. This is the headline, right? This is above the fold. This is the don't bury the lead. If you are a commercial photographer, or a photographer that has consistently done cars, tabletop, etc., if you do not know how to use AI in its most effective way today, You will be out of business tomorrow.
I like the sound of you pounding on your table. Yeah.
But that is the
So
fact.
so the thing I said earlier, okay, IKEA doing all its catalog digitally, using CGI, but there's still people who are who are making it with the assistance of the computer. The Zalando thing I talked about earlier. Found an article where they say around 70% of Zalando's editorial campaign images were AI generated in the fourth quarter of last year. So we are talking about a turnaround of 3 to 4 days instead of 6 weeks, and a cost cut of 90% to get them something that is good enough for what they need.
In many cases, and I have seen some commercials for Chanel, for example. This is a film commercial, not a still. So a commercial that would be easily $2 million to shoot and indistinguishable from what I would have seen on TV, with all of the characteristics of a, otherworldly beauty model, you know what I mean? A voiceover, j'adore, that kind of.
And we have seen a few of those. I remember, was it a year ago, a Coca-Cola commercial that was that was AI generated. That was still clearly AI, but we are now, especially now, seeing Google's VO. Is it 2 or 3? VO3, I think.
VO3, yeah.
That this stuff is becoming so much better so quickly that the whole, you don't need people to light anymore. You don't need the entire logistics. You don't need.
Do it at home in your underwear is what you can do.
And in your mom's basement. We are not talking about the ethics of the acquisition of the training data or anything, but that is what is happening right now, and companies are gobbling it up.
Yes, and if you are a photographer, which is, I think, if I was going to make a point, is the photographer's mind is still essential in creating this. The photography aesthetic, the way things are designed, composed, lit, the sense of grain, texture or not, the clarity, even the time of day, and if there's people involved, the mood, the expression, all of that capture is very much intuited by photographers when they are good and interacting, even in advertising.
And I think that's... Sorry, go ahead.
If they know AI, they just apply that tool. Instead of the tool of the machine of a camera, lens, light, shutter, digital capture, offload, and editing, they have another tool, but they apply exactly the aesthetic that they would on a set with those tools to create an image that is there stylistically and other. Yeah. And so I feel that if you are for example, if you're a food stylist, used to coming and painting little sesame seeds on a bun, and you understand AI, and you're working with a AI-based, call it image maker, you can then collaborate on where to place those seeds. Maybe the photographer doesn't have that aesthetic, so that's somebody you would bring in, but it's just 1 or 2 people. It's not a team. You don't need a studio with a kitchen or a turntable or massive lighting. And all of these savings are basically they're pain points for those who run a business in
sure.
But they are now. They're happening whether we like it or not. And again, this has nothing to do. By the way, all those illustrators who are hired to do those commercial, those illustrated ads of the 50s, well, they were out of business. And
yeah. I mean, after the whole, CGI first, which was much more hands-on for the creatives, and AI, different kinds of hands-on. That's the main question that I see in a lot of places, where do we, the photographers, fit in? And you just said it. The photographer still has a role, especially if you have let's say, if you possess the knowledge of seeing things and judging things. So I have the feeling that photographers are rising up to a higher level using that. You bring in the authenticity. You bring in you're more of a director than a photographer now. You have it's turning into a hybrid craft, right? There's lighting, there's composition, there's storytelling. I have yet to see an AI that does a good job and something original there. These are your superpowers. The photographer is a director in this new sort of pipeline, and that, I think, is my personal takeaway, that landscape is changing quickly, but if you know how to see, if you know how to visually convey emotion or bring emotion into things, and if you have learned how to steer that in the right direction, then that's what will make you almost indispensable. That's my thought here.
I mean, artistically, I've been just running an experiment in certain landscapes that I've done specifically, in the Southern Hemisphere, dramatic landscapes, photographed at a certain time with the mist kind of, descending just past the peaks. So the peaks of the mountains are sticking through the fog, and it's just, a little bit of ocean there. So, but then I've been trying to, and successfully, create an AI, I want to say, version of it, not with the reference of my photographs, but creating an image that is indistinguishable from the reality that I photographed, just as an exercise. And I have to say that I'm there. And I'm also getting to the point where I am up-resing it to the point of, wow, you think this is taken by, at least a medium format camera, and that, so that there's that as well. In other words, there's the creative elements of how to use AI to create a photographic moment or image or aesthetic or application, whatever. But then there is the what happens afterwards, how you're going to present that. If that's up on a billboard, is it on a phone screen, and be able to use the tools that are evolving, whether it's Topaz or, there are several around, a Magnifique, a few, to create what at first felt a little artificially sharpened and blown up, but now, using more and more sophisticated AI, they could emulate what does the grain feel like at this resolution and all of the rest of it. And then, of course, there's the print, which goes back to, if we just say, well, I'm going to use paper and ink. So it does come back to the basic of printing, even though we're using digital printers. It's still the basic aspect of ink on paper. How you apply it is getting more sophisticated, more controllable. So we kind of, come back to the surface of the piece. But in advertising, that's not essential, because even in magazines now, for the most part, are, you're reading it on your iPad, right?
Exactly. The magazine itself is a dying art form, I would say. So to take this just a little step to the side, but very much in the vein of what we were talking about in terms of photography. If anyone listening to this, if you've heard of vibe coding, of software development by using English, by telling the system what you want, We are seeing something really similar there. And just a few days ago, a talk by Andrej Karpathy was released. He's the guy who coined the term vibe coding. He's the guy who brought AI to Stanford. As a teacher, pretty much, and he does this talk about the role in this new world of software developers, and it is totally worth watching, because the one thing I took away from that is we are looking at the human's role being elevated, being changed, but also we're looking at AI as a tool, and the moment we have tools to interact with the AI on a, let's say, iterative basis, if we have a fast turnaround, I ask something, the AI delivers, I need a quick way to check if that is what I need. If not, I need a quick way to correct and do the second round, the third round. With software development, you need these kind of tools. With visual art, you need these kind of tools. So we're looking at a very similar kind of development in other fields as well. So if you're, let's say, software inclined, development inclined, certainly worth watching that talk. Very, very.
I mean, those of you who've experimented with Manus, for example, which is a very interesting piece for vibe coding, but I can see, and it's early days, because you're not going to get what you want immediately, but it's getting better and better tomorrow. The interesting thing is, you can see a world where a sculptor conceptualizes something in their head, dictated to Manus, create a 3D model, make it more detailed, sharpen it, and then send that to Robotor in Italy, and have it sculpted out of a piece of marble and shipped to this address. Okay, next.
All right. Well,
this is not that far.
No, it's not.
I mean, we could probably do that today. Now, it won't be as we imagine it in terms of its perfection, but I predict less than a year from now, it will be what we anticipate could be. And so when you're a creative individual stuck in the sense of grousing about the world is changing and leaving me behind and my old tools, blah, blah, get over it and start to think about using what makes you creative and adapting to new tools.
And the one interesting thing is that in the quotes old days, when something new came along, it was usually hard to get access. There were lots of gatekeepers. Now we're looking at a lot of access for everyone. So it's not hard to get your hands on something really sophisticated and play with it and learn.
YouTube is the greatest university in the world at this point. It's like the Library of Alexandria. You could find a great teacher in almost any subject or anything you needed to know. Now, you may have to dig through a lot of bad teachers, but you could just if
that's another skill. That's another skill you have to have, is to dig and to be ready to ditch stuff that trust your gut.
Yeah,
and you'll get there.
And when you find someone, you will learn, you devote the time, and it's exciting and it's great. So, in terms of all of these things, I think you and I have been using these tools since they cross our desks, because we're interested in these things just as a form. It's just fun, and it's, it's exciting to see how you can push your aesthetic. That doesn't mean I don't pick up my camera and shoot pictures. I do. but sometimes instead of just being happy with that picture, I'll blow it up and abstract it a bit, and then I will feed that into a ChatGPT or something to ask it what is it, and generate another image from my own pictures and feed it and blend it. These are things that are almost sculptural. They're fun, they're interesting, and all of a sudden what comes out are happy accidents, which then you can fine tune.
Which you as the human guided. That's
Yes.
the most important part of it. All right, let's leave it at that. Everyone watch those different things. The Andrei Karpathy talk, again, high recommendation, even though it's not about photography, but it's generally about the whole area that we're finding ourselves in right now. Picks of the week. I brought one that has nothing to do with AI. Well, possibly does have to do with AI. Do you know the oldest photography centered app on the smartphone?
Sure.
It's called Snapseed, and it's been around forever. Was released by Nix Software, a German Hamburg software company in 2011. Then Google bought them, and then they had it like it was there, but it wasn't really developed further for a long time. And now, the first time since 2017, there's a big update to Snapseed on the iOS and iPad platform. I still have it. I still use it for a lot of just regular editing things that I need to do. It does raw photos. It has new filters. It has a new user interface. It's more sleek. It has definitely some AI features in there. And it's still free. So if you're on the iPhone, that's something to download and put in your in your photography tools folder.
I think this was one of the most surprising upgrades that I've seen. I've always had a very I've loved Snapseed. There are a few tools that they have. Glow, for example, their Glow tool just is a beauty. Now I could do that in Photoshop, with layering and adjust. But this seems to do it so quickly, and it's beautiful. And to see the kind of new version of this, embracing all the old tools and
especially what they call the U-points, which they invented, which is an automated masking kind of thing. So if you want to apply a change to just a part of the image, it intelligently makes your selection, makes the selection for you, and it's a very, very cool kind of little thing. So Snapseed, go get it if you don't have it. It's free.
Yeah.
And then you brought us a book.
Something about advertising.
Oh, look at that. It's a book by Taschen.
Now, Taschen has, for those interested in what we were talking about in terms of American ads of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. They have beautiful collections.
There's your car ads. Look at that. Pontiac.
Yeah. Now, there's no CG here. Maybe they cut and pasted. I don't know. But these were amazing. They're beautiful. They're very inspiring. And there's something modern about it in terms of our AI aesthetic that anyway, this is a book, if you're interested in ads and aesthetics, I highly recommend it. It's really a beautiful thing.
And I mean, this here the VW bug ad with like just a white room, put a car in, put a little text under it, something slightly controversial or thought-provoking, and that's I think we've lost some of the art of smart advertising, I believe.
Well, it would be copywriting, because that's the concept here generally comes from the writer.
True. But also the way they visually then show the things. There, you need someone who has an artistic a vein that does that. So there we go. That's our. Thanks for sharing. 25 euros here. Over here, I'm not sure what the dollar amount is, but Taschen books, not very expensive, but very good stuff in them. So there we go. A book, a website, lots of food for thought. That was it for today. Thanks for joining us. You can interact with us on our Discord. Link is in the show notes. And of course, we're online, and all the other episodes are at thefuturephotography.com. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, everyone, take care and bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Future of Photography. Join the discussion on our Discord, find the show notes and all episodes at thefutureofphotography.com, and subscribe wherever you listen to audio.